6,500 people who worked with Postgres want to work with MySQL. Welcome back to Perpetual Jank Machine. I'm not going to do the joke this time because we have gone through so much internet fixing and craziness and voice cutting outage and resetting things up to even consider. I barely even scraped together a topic this week. So anyway, I'm John.
Miles.
The StackOverflow Survey came out for this year, this week. I actually found there were a couple of really interesting takeaways here, specifically in like the language categories and some trends that I've seen over the years that I thought were interesting. And also some interesting things in what people actually want compared to what they're currently using. So there's quite a bit of stuff here. I must note that the sample size is like 70K, so it's not like huge, even though it's a huge site. You know, this is a survey that people have to take time out of their day to fill in. I didn't fill it out because I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I didn't get anything for it, but I think I turned like emails off or something like that.
I just don't have a Stack Overflow account that gets marketing emails. Yeah. Yeah, so just as some demographic information, about 31% of people have been coding on this for 1 to 4 years, which I don't think is really representative of the population of programmers, just because presumably 30% of developers did not just start coding professionally in the last 1 to 4 years. Like, we've been growing, but I don't think we've been growing that quickly. So that's just something to consider. Like, I personally don't fall into that, and I don't think many other people do. So I actually noticed a couple of really interesting things about it this year. Firstly, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and Python are dominating as expected, as usual, as they always have for quite some time now. Interestingly, Python seems to be a little bit more heavily weighted among people who are not professional developers, which I've kind of encountered. You do tend to use a lot of Python in school, and for non-professional tasks, like if you do not use code, is like if your title is not software engineer, but you still actually have to code some things, it's usually in Python.
Yeah, data science is big into that
Mm-hmm.
Python, at least from my
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Notably, I find this actually quite interesting. 6% of people are using Dart, and 9.55% of people are using Go. So those languages have been on a pretty that's a lot for like that's like a quarter of what, or maybe a fifth of what Python is right now, and genuinely was not expecting that actually. Like I know Go has been getting big, but I didn't know it was that big now. Like it's just barely behind PowerShell.
It's just a good language, like it knows what it's doing and it does it well.
Yep, it's not the best language by any means, but it is a very good language, batteries included. You can use it however the heck you want, and I think it deserves its popularity. However, there are some
Yeah,
technical limitations that, may not make it the best for certain things, but we've found more than enough ways to work around that at this point. Definitely well deserved, though, absolutely. Python is one of my 3 languages that I use when that's like Clojure's the one that I use when it's just me working on it and I need to go fast. Rust is when I need it to perform well, and then Python is when other people are going to be working on it and it doesn't need to go fast.
yeah, definitely. Python, yeah, I use that for all my coding interview questions because I mean, everything's pretty much just like a one-liner, and it just, yeah, everything pretty much just works whenever you need it to. Obviously not under like a high stress situation, but whenever you're just need
Yep.
to get a program together, yeah, Python's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to move on to the web frameworks real quick. So I'm not going to make any predictions about whether we're going to reach a React monoculture one day, but I know that a lot of people who have worked with Angular do not want to work with it in the future. So I'm pretty sure like a good chunk of that 26% is people who are currently stuck on it, and I can definitely say that I'm one of them. However, I did not respond to the survey. So, I'm not saying that we're going to reach a React monoculture because there's probably going to be something that disrupts it in the future, but React definitely deserves its success because it's a really good framework to work in my opinion. And uh, the fact that Angular is still so high up, I think, is definitely definitely slightly disheartening because honestly, I think that a lot of people really don't like it. I think on the latest like state of the front end surveys that came out, it's like 50% of people have used it but would not use it again in their opinions or something like that. Something ridiculous like that. But
What's the one you're rooting for the most?
I really like I think that React is a good framework just for getting stuff done. Um I mean, there's a lot of other like newer frameworks that don't really chart on this that make use of stuff like web components, which I think is probably more forward looking, especially because React's web component support story is pretty abysmal. Like you have to wrap everything in like a polyfill to make it work with React. So I'm sure that one day that will either get addressed or it will just be like React will just be overtaken by a web component framework that compiles things to web components. But that day is far from now, and honestly, I think that React is doing a great job. There's also Vue, which I have used in the past and I've
Excuse you.
enjoyed.
No, you're absolutely wrong. See, what's going to happen? React is going to continue to dominate the market and grow till it is a monoculture, and then someone will have to build something on top of React just to do all that wrapping for you automatically.
Okay, so then our apps will be another 250 kilobytes large. I'm looking forward to it.
That's just the way the world works, man. I don't make the rules.
All right. So I also noticed that Django and Flask are pretty much tied for Python web frameworks. I am actually kind of glad that Flask is on top because I like Flask a lot better, but I'll save my bias for later. ASP.NET and Spring are also like pretty much tied, which I think is kind of interesting, although ASP.NET Core is like way above it. So moving on to, I guess, IDEs, 71% of people are using VS Code. That is, wow, that's a lot for something that launched so recently. In comparison, about 24% are using Vim, have reported to using that. And Emacs is down at 5.3%, which is shameful. NeoVim is at 5%, and it's really interesting to see that so many people have reported to using Vim compared to Emacs. That it's always kind of portrayed as like a holy war of equals, but it really kind of goes to show how many people actually like. I know that Vim is the one that you're typically taught in school, and Emacs is the one that you only like get into if you're weird. And I say that as somebody who uses it.
If you like functional programming, let's be honest here. You only use Emacs if you like functional programming.
It's not even functional programming. It's just if you like Lisp, really.
Even an even smaller subset.
If you get into Lisp, then you're probably into
Yeah.
Emacs. I think the average Emacs user is probably a little bit more involved with their editor, if that makes sense, but that's just
Oh yeah.
based on completely
Well,
anecdotal
I
evidence.
think one of the real things that gets people at least associated with Vim is that it's integrated into a lot of other things. Like whenever, like Git, everyone knows Git, and if you ever have to do command line things, sometimes Git will automatically pop you into Vim, and then you have to figure out how to close Vim. And then once you realize, oh wait, this is a text editor, you know what I'm saying? Like it's there, it's in front of your face more often than something like Emacs, which you have to actively seek out. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's because it's the default editor on a lot of distros, but I might be wrong there. Because I think that Git just can shell out to your editor. I don't know. I use the Emacs like
That's exactly
porcelain
what I'm
for it,
saying. It
so.
is the default for so many things, including Git and so many other things, which is, I think, why so many people are at the very least familiar with it. And I think once you get down to it, after opening Visual Studio once or Android Studio, you realize that you kind of just want a text editor and not a whole IDE. So then you kind of get into, a text editor like Notepad++, Vim, Emacs, and then and then I think just more people are more familiar with Vim because it's just in their face. So that's probably why Emacs is kind of, falling to the wayside.
Yeah, my hypothesis is that you like all the IDE features that you configure yourself, but that's a whole nother episode. All right, so you want to move on to the spiciest part of this survey. We have the most loved and dreaded languages. This is the one that always makes all of the headlines. At the bottom, just going to start out with the inoffensive ones. We got COBOL. Nobody's surprised there. VBA. Actually, I'm kind of surprised that VBA beat COBOL in terms of favorability because, I mean, COBOL's at least kind of cool. You got that like 1960s aesthetic. When you're typing it, you can at least go down to your local store, pick up a cigar. Dress up in some tweed. Maybe not if you've been doing it for the last 50 years, but I feel like that would kind of lend a little bit of cool factor to it that VBA just doesn't have.
Hey, the only people who are using it are the people who are using it for the past 50 years.
I suppose that might be true. So, also some ones that I wanted to pick out of the middle of the pack. We've got C++ sitting at pretty much 50-50, which honestly kind of expected. We got standard Lisp sitting at 55. We got Scala sitting at 52. C is sitting at 40, which,
Uh...
given the general quality of average C code, I could see that. It's like you got the Linux kernel and then you got everything else. The quality of average C code is not great.
I love C. I love it, but I can see why no one else likes it. I love to think about all that stuff, but nobody wants to think about all the nitty-gritty details. And that's obviously reflected with assembly being even lower because obviously even more nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
Objective-C is pretty darn low, though.
Well, I mean, Objective-C is like if you took the worst parts of Smalltalk and the worst parts of C and then you jammed them together. So I'm genuinely not surprised that it's below both C and presumably where Smalltalk would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's mainly used by people who develop stuff for Mac, right? Isn't that
Yeah,
what it
and like
is?
iOS apps, but like old iOS apps before they made the transition to Swift. So I could definitely see that being
Oh, I didn't know they swapped to Swift.
going the way of the VBA.
MATLAB's really low. I didn't.
I mean, I think the theme
I
here
don't
is
know.
that
I've never used MATLAB.
a lot of the stuff at the bottom is code written by people who don't have software engineer as their title, like VBA, MATLAB, maybe not Objective-C.
Well, I mean, explain that for Python.
Well, Python's just so
People
huge.
love Python.
Like
People
Objective-C,
love
MATLAB,
Python.
VBA, those all have very niche uses, and VBA and MATLAB uniquely. I mean, VBA is kind of like the non-programmer's programming language, and so is MATLAB. It's like the scientist programming language. So I could definitely foresee it not being
Yeah.
loved because people who might not
I
have the
mean,
discipline that a normal software engineer would have ends up writing that kind of code more frequently.
I disagree. Because even R is higher than like something like C, and C is like a programming like language, like straight up. No one else is using C for anything other than programming languages, and no one's using R for anything other than data science. So I'm not sure if that's what's going on here, at least.
Yeah, you
In
might
my
have a
mind.
point there, actually. I guess it kind of depends on how, like, I think of our people, like statisticians and maybe people who might have a little bit more formal training than, like, the people who are using MATLAB, but you might have a point there. R is also open source, so that's also probably a huge benefit to it. You don't have to use, like, GNU Octave if you don't
Yeah.
want to shell out.
I'm just surprised MATLAB's so low. Like I've never used it. I've never heard too much about it other than it just being the language that a lot of engineers are forced to use. But seeing it so low kind of either leads me to believe that every engineer that's used it has hated it, or that there are a lot of computer programmers forced to use MATLAB for some odd reason.
Well, let's actually drill down into the response numbers, I guess. That might highlight a little bit of this. So it looks like 831 people responded to that. That is actually genuinely more than I thought, because COBOL got 69 loved and 368 dreaded, whereas MATLAB got 831 loved and 3,000 dreaded. And R got like 1,000 to 2,000, so that's pretty similar. So, I mean, it's like not everybody, obviously. It's still a low sample size, but it's still not nothing.
Yeah, maybe it's just the engineers who surf StackOverflow specifically for MATLAB issues. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, for comparison, Node.js, which is, if I had to guess, well, I guess JavaScript's probably more. JavaScript got 33,000 to about 20,500. So, yeah, it's maybe about, I mean, it's not all the sample, but it's not an insignificant chunk of the sample.
What is F sharp?
F sharp is the functional language that runs on the CLR that was inspired by OCaml. It's a pretty okay language. It's not perfect, but it's okay.
I understood about 0% of that, but I'll just trust you on that.
It's what the people who don't like writing C# because it's too mutable use. That's what all the hipsters use. They have to like interact with CLR stuff.
Oh, it's just C# but functional. Okay, gotcha.
It's like OCaml for the CLR, which yeah, sure. It interacts with like the .NET framework, the C# standard libraries, all of that. It's just a slightly different language. Well, it's a very different language, but it's a very different language that's based off of OCaml instead of Java.
Okay. I think I get it a bit more. Still need to brush up on a lot of things, but yeah, I think I get it a bit more.
Interestingly, Rust is still the most loved language, and I absolutely agree with that. Rust totally deserves it because it is a very feature-rich, very fast language. Clojure is second place.
I have never used Rust.
Again, Clojure totally deserves that. Best language ever. As a matter of fact, it should be first, honestly.
Shut the hell up.
TypeScript is next, which, I can appreciate. TypeScript has a good type system, and JavaScript is, I mean, empirically, it's not the worst language on this chart, and I don't really think it deserves a lot of the flack that it gets.
Okay, I TypeScript is only high because JavaScript is so is used so much Like anything that's an alternative to JavaScript that even seems like it's starting to take market share will just automatically be rated high on this list. You know that for a fact.
I guess you might have a point there because Dart is also 63%, which is really high. That's like seventh place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Dart is used for a whole bunch of other things like Flutter, but actually, does Dart even compile to JavaScript anymore? I completely have lost the plot with Dart, but I know that it used to.
I have no clue.
But yeah, this totally validates my language decisions because Rust, Clojure, and Python are my uses, and Python is number 6, Clojure is number 2, and Rust is number 1. So I feel very
Yeah.
validated.
I think a lot of functional programming languages just hit high on the list in general. I think people just like using functional programming
They are
languages
really nice.
because I don't know, like even look at Haskell, like that's like, isn't that like pretty much almost dead nowadays?
I mean, it's not
Like
dead, but
just
it's
because
not
it was
popular.
it was such an old, like it was with C, like like it was an old
It's newer
language,
than
and
C.
the fact
Haskell is
that
like 90s ish.
maybe I'm getting it confused with something
The
else.
oldest
Am I getting,
functional
wait,
language
was
on
Lisp
here,
the really
yeah,
old one?
Lisp is the old one. Lisp is the, but that's also like not functional. Lisp has a totally separate
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, Lisp is even
thing.
higher.
Like you can write very non-functional
Yeah,
Lisp.
but yeah, it was it was more of a mathematician's kind of language whenever it was like, only professors who use programming is what I get from it.
It was definitely a different take on computation back then. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Lisp's goodwill still kind of stems from the fact that it has a really robust macro system and it still has a lot of those qualities that make it an incredibly productive language. However, you can see that Lisp can be improved because Clojure is like 30 points above it, approximately. Well, 25 points.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we've learned that people don't like object-oriented languages. They they're seem vaguely fine with imperative because, like, Go, stuff like that is kind of higher on that, and that people really seem to like functional programming languages, if you want to like overgeneralize, I guess, a bit.
Yeah, I think what I would take away from this is there seems to be this really I'm kind of surprised because Java is like the outlier in this thesis, but there seems to be this band from like about 60% to about 65% where like an enormous number of modern languages fit in. And it's actually really strange because a lot of these are very different, like Dart, Swift, Node.js, Go, F Sharp, C Sharp, SQL, Kotlin, JavaScript, and HTML. And if you want to count Crystal, it's a little bit below 60, but it's about there. Those are all used for very different use cases, except for like, C Sharp, F Sharp. But even then, that's like a very different style of language. And I guess, Go C Sharp for use cases. But that's a really narrow band, and it's a lot of these languages are quite either similar in how they are written, like Dart, Swift, C Sharp, Go, all very C-like languages. I guess you can count Node.js in there too, and Kotlin. Um, and it kind of shows in that they all have very similar ratings. And F Sharp, I guess, it's not the most popular functional language in there, so I don't know if that really fits the thesis, but and then you kind of have like these functional languages that are at the very top, plus TypeScript, but you can program functionally in TypeScript if you'd like. And then you've pretty much everything else. I'm actually really surprised that Java is not liked by more people because Java is, I mean,
Why
it's not.
everyone hates Java? It's like just slightly better version of JavaScript. Oh wait, no. Wait, JavaScript is even higher than Java.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not surprised
I
at
mean,
that at all.
JavaScript actually,
Okay, who was like,
JavaScript gets like the memes thrown at it, right? You get like all these WTF JavaScript talks. Nobody talks about Java in that way, and it's precipitously lower. It's 13 points lower, 14 points lower.
okay, everybody know, I feel like everybody knows that they hate Java though. Like, who came up with the idea everything has to be a class? Like, you
The
know what
guy who
I'm
wrote
saying?
Smalltalk,
Like, who was like, that's a good idea?
I
Huh?
think it's Alan Kay.
Small
Alan
talk? Oh, is
Kay,
that
that
true
guy.
for small talk? Okay. But whoever came up, like, we can all think of situations where we might not want something to be a class. Like, just, we just want one function. We just want one function that's not in a class. That's all we want. You could think of so many situations. Java's just made so many weird, stupid
Okay,
decisions.
counterpoint
Like,
though. C
and
sharp,
it was
C
just
sharp, the
revolutionary
clone of
at the time.
Java, is at 62%.
Okay, but I feel like C Sharp took the weird things that people just accepted with Java and then like fixed them. Like, you know what I'm saying? Java was like revolutionary at the time. Everybody was jumping on that object-oriented bandwagon, and Java was really just like spearheading it. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? And then obviously with anything that gets like really popular really fast, there are just those questionable decisions that are baked into the whole thing. And I feel like Java, that's what people really hate about it. And then I think, if you improve any of those, your language is just leaps and bounds ahead of Java's.
I guess, but I don't really know what C Sharp improves in that respect. Like it has link, but Java also recently added its stream support, so I don't think that link makes up
It
13%.
looks less ugly. That would give me a 10% lead over Java.
I mean, I guess the real question is like what version are you using? Because if you're using like Java 6, Java 7, okay, yeah, sure, I get it. But if you're using modern Java versus modern C Sharp, IMO, C Sharp is not 13 points better than Java. Java and C Sharp are very similar languages now.
I don't know. Maybe it's just that deep-seated hatred. Like they can't even accept that Java's better nowadays. It's already there.
I
You
guess,
can't get
maybe.
rid of it.
All right. Oh, and Delphi's 47%, which is 47% higher than it should be. That's my take on that.
Dolphy? Wait, I've never even heard of it. What is it?
It's the modern incantation of Pascal, which is a language that is not frequently used and in my opinion should not be frequently used.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that breaks that trend that you were talking about, where the newer languages rate so much higher than the older versions of them.
I mean, it's still at Java
Dolphy?
levels, but like I cannot believe that people like Delphi more than Java. That is no.
Yeah,
That has to be
yeah.
like I mean Delphi has a much lower sample, so that might be why, but still. Moving down to the database things, Oracle and IBM DB2 are in last place as they darn well should be. Redis and Postgres are at the top as they probably darn well should be. And I actually noticed that there was a lot of like interesting databases that were actually kind of in a really middling spot, like right next to the MySQLs and the MariaDBs of the world. Like DynamoDB is sitting at 55%, and interestingly, Cassandra is actually doing really poorly. Which I think that especially DynamoDB is a really interesting database, especially with how it works and how it's like not really you don't really have to worry about it because it's like Amazon's machines.
Do people want an interesting database? Like, I think when you think database, you kind of just want something that works and works how you expect it to. And I think it's kind
Well, it's an
of,
interesting database in the sense that it eliminates a lot of the failure points of other databases. Like it's a very basic database in terms of like it's just a key value store pretty much. Like it's just a document store like
well,
Mongo,
yeah, but
but
I'm
you don't have to administer the servers for it.
more of just like a resistance to change. You know what I'm saying? Kind of situation. Like Postgres
Yeah,
SQL
I
is
really like
just like
Dynamo.
an
I would.
SQL. Like, it's pretty bog standard, but it's nice. I think it's open source, isn't it?
It's open source and it's really
Yeah, that's
good.
what I'm saying. Does it's not a huge deviation from like anything like my like any of the other SQLs. But it's just good. I think is the thing.
Hmm.
Like you don't want to have to think too much about a database is all I'm saying. And whenever something is different, that makes you have to think about it more.
I suppose. I guess I'm thinking about a database in a different way. In that I'm thinking when you're thinking about a database, you're probably thinking about the server that it's running on. Do I need to provision more memory for it? How is the server even up? Why is this read so slow? Why is it locking on this? Whereas DynamoDB has none of those problems. It just automatically scales to, pretty much as AWS can handle, which is a lot. And you just kind of pay by the read and write. And it can get, a little bit more expensive than if you bought your own hardware and managed your own enormous database at scale. Of course, you're paying for the engineer's time and the software engineering effort that goes into it. But A, they have a really, really aggressive price plan on it because presumably they want a lot of people to adopt it. It's part of the free tier. And secondly, it's just a really like rock solid thing. Like DynamoDB is down, there's a good chance that AWS is down, and that just doesn't happen. Or if it happens, then the internet goes down, and there are news articles written about it, and nobody blames you; they blame AWS.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, see if the percentage grows next year. Maybe like I said, people just don't like change. So maybe as people get used to it more, maybe it'll kick up a little bit.
It is a small sample, but I don't expect more people to start using it just because, like most companies, databases are the ones that
Yeah.
their CTO set up
Yeah.
15 years
Oh, I
ago.
didn't look at the want for the programming languages.
Yeah, I actually thought that the wants were pretty interesting as
Yeah,
well.
like
A
Python.
lot of people want Python,
Obvious.
which,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I'd list that as a want, right? Like maybe Python would be an upgrade from like, your Java 7s,
Yeah.
but I would presume that there's not that many people like hoping for Python when they could be hoping for something else.
Yeah, I'm really surprised JavaScript. Like, what else are you using that you want to use JavaScript? Like, what are you doing that's web development that's not JavaScript? I guess. I guess.
My guess is it's backend people who just want to move to the front end categorically. I think that's it. Because there's no way there's
That's it.
14% of like these 70,000 respondents who are writing like ActiveX components or whatever, or Visual Basic for Internet Explorer 3 and want to upgrade to JavaScript. There's no way in hell that's happening.
Yeah.
However, I could
Clojure's-
see 14% of people being stuck on a backend service.
I guess. Yeah, I guess this is probably very dependent on what industry you want to swap into, which is why JavaScript and TypeScript are so high. Probably a lot of people are like, I want to be web developers, except for the Python.
Well, I think that NumPy and TensorFlow are also wanted, but again, it's like, I'm guessing that this has like a very high bias towards people who are early on in their careers because, again, I don't think that 30% of people who are developing just as a class are 1 to 4 years into their career, especially in the US. I know that a lot of this is maybe a bit more international, so that might be the case internationally, but still. And like, I think that a lot of like those wishes are probably just like that would be cool, but I don't reasonably expect that to be part of my career because I don't have the qualifications to be a data scientist or to be somebody who's writing TensorFlow code. So that might be why.
Yeah, definitely. Go's pretty high. Delphi's really low on the list, so you got that going for you. Clojure isn't too high though.
Go and Rust are really high.
I guess
which I would
Clojure.
expect.
Clojure seems more like a hobbyist kind of language. Like, I mean, like, more personal projects rather than, like, I don't think you're writing a lot of enterprise code in Clojure.
I think it's a language that just repels a lot of people based on its initial impressions, and that the people who get it, and then the people who don't, or they don't have a reason to want it.
Yeah.
They don't know why. Because, like, Clojure is an ugly language starting out, but it reveals its beauty over time. It's a slow burn.
Hey, well, maybe, I mean, Python was a slow burn, and it's, like, the most loved language, so yeah, I could see it slowly growing, yeah.
Yeah, but Python is C-like, so it has those implicit advantages.
Definitely that's true. But I think as people,
I mean, name me a language in the top 10 that is not based on C.
Well,
that's not SQL.
think
every single language in the top 10 is C-like.
Well, see, that's the thing. I think people don't like object-oriented programming languages. I think that's growing more and more.
Actually, I'm going to do you one better. The first non-C-like language that is not a markup language and that is not SQL is Haskell at 3.14%. Which is like number 12, I think, or something ridiculous.
Well, I'm saying as people start to like object-oriented less, I could like a lot of them seem to be moving towards functional. You know what I'm saying? So I could see Clojure growing reasonably.
I would actually say that this probably reveals that they're not going to do that because Python is not a functional programming language. You can use it in a functional manner, but it's not a functional programming language.
It's just a general
TypeScript,
purpose
same
language.
thing, not
it's
a functional
not
programming
anything language. Python is just, that's the beauty of Python. It's just Python. Like it doesn't.
Yeah, but I don't think we can infer that people are moving toward it to do functional programming. Same thing for TypeScript.
No, that's not.
And what I think really solidifies me here is that Go is at 14%. Rust, which is inherently also not a functional programming language, but has functional features and probably encourages it more than most languages, is at 14%. And you got to scroll down a whole heck of a lot to get to Kotlin, which is like the first language that I would say actually treats functional programming as like a first class, like recommended thing.
Yeah. I bet you it'll be a slow burn.
So I would say that like the move back to like standard function-driven imperative programming is probably much stronger than the move.
I'd say when object-oriented hits like less than 50% of the market, you're just going to see functional programming explode. I bet you, because then people will feel comfortable enough swapping their stuff from an object-oriented situation to something that's much more like, like the options seem a lot more possible once something like that happens. But that's wild speculation on my part.
I don't know. I think we're going to see a big Go boom. I think we're going to see a big Python boom.
I mean,
continuing. And it's going to be function-based imperative Python, and it's going to be function-based imperative Go. And the Python people are going to try to maybe adopt some functional characteristics for like if your team is like a senior engineer who kind of knows what he's doing, you're probably going to do that. And then if it doesn't, then you're probably just going to write a Go clone in Python.
Yeah, I've
That's my
heard
guess.
a lot of good things about Go. I don't see how Python could. I feel like any use case that Python can be used for is already being used for, unless like, you have to deal with legacy code. Because like I said, like data engineers, they're all using it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that's like the biggest market that can use it, as well as people who don't. People who aren't like professional programmers who need a programming language, but they just need something. They just need to know a programming language. They learn Python. So I don't see anybody else moving to Python because I think it's not robust enough for any other use case other than what it's already being used for. Whereas something like Go, I think, is more robust. So I could see Go getting larger. I can't see Python growing too much. And obviously anything that will replace JavaScript will probably explode in popularity.
I would also like to just mention one more concerning statistic that I found. 6,500 people who worked with Postgres want to work with MySQL.
Yeah.
I just found that to be incredibly funny because it's like they're working with the good one and they actively want to not work with the good one. So I think that with that kind of a statistic, perhaps might want to take the survey with a bit of salt. But it's still interesting. I'm still glad that Clojure is winning in all the categories that it should rightly be winning. Most importantly, people who write Clojure, the small minority, are still far and away the best paid people in all of software. So take that as you will. All right, Miles, I don't really know what we were going to get out of that other than just confirming our biases, but it's always a good time to talk with you and continue to languish in our own fixed sets of ways.
Yes.
And that's the show. Thanks to Meydän, that's Meyda with an umlaut N, for their track The Beauty of Maths, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license, which serves as our intro, outro, and interlude music. You can find more in the description of this episode. Please remember that the opinions expressed in this production may not reflect those of other participants on the show, or those of any participants' past, current, or future employers. They're also probably exaggerated a bit for comedy's sake. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.